This is Join Us in France, episode 284. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and today's episode of the podcast is a conversation with Kim Loftus about her trip around the northeastern part of France. She had a theme for this trip. She wanted to see places in France that were important in the life and quest of Joan of Arc. We concentrated our conversation on the amazing achievements in Joan's life and what it's like visiting the places where she literally turned the tide of history around in favor of the French and against the English. We have an expression for that in French. We call these places ville joannique, which means a city where Joan of Arc played an important role. I can't find a good translation for that in English. Now, we're not going to talk about all of them today. There are too many, but we'll give you an overview and you'll find links to more resources about those villes joanniques in the show notes at joinusinfrance.com/284. That's the number 284. There are two major female figures of the Middle Ages that have continued to catch our interest for hundreds of years. They are Joan of Arc. I bet you saw that coming. And the other one, maybe you know, Eleanor of Aquitaine. There are people in the world who've never heard of Eleanor of Aquitaine, I'm sure, but who hasn't heard of Joan of Arc? She has become a legend, and for good reason, as we'll see in this episode. The reason why I'm releasing this episode this week is that next Saturday, May 16th, 2020, is the 100th anniversary of I guess you say it's a centennial, don't you? Yeah, it's a centennial anniversary of Joan of Arc becoming a saint. There were a lot of celebrations planned for this occasion, but they've been cancelled due to the current pandemic. I hope they just postpone them and hold them later. It would be a shame not to mark the date. And speaking of the pandemic, I'll give you a brief update about how things will proceed in France after May 11th in my remarks after the interview. Bonjour, Kim, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Bonjour, Annie.
So, Joan of Arc was born in Domremy-la-Pucelle. Well, at the time it was called Domremy. They now renamed it Domremy-la-Pucelle, which means the Virgin, because it was very important in the Middle Ages that she was a virgin. So, you'll tell us what you saw there in a moment. Her father was a successful farmer. He was the oldest of 5 children. She was extremely pious, and she went to pray in the village church several times a day. Joan of Arc started hearing voices at age 13 telling her that it was her calling to deliver France from the wicked English rulers and put a French king on the throne again. At age 16, 17, she set off to meet the rightful heir of the throne, raised an army, inspired French people to support this cause, and she managed to put him back on the throne. Of course, she's been a legend ever since, and because she was the unlikeliest warrior savior of a country. The country was in big trouble. She was not a very likely person to save us from this mess. She was also at the center of 2 big trials, which is why her life is well documented, and also why it's so hard to talk about her without being a specialist, because it's complicated, it's well documented, and it's easy to say something dumb. Which I'd rather not say dumb things. I'm trying not to, but I'm hoping that I won't. There's also plenty of lore surrounding her life, but she was a real girl who died young in a tragic end. She was burned at the stake. She achieved amazing results, and she turned the 100-Year War around in favor of the French. I found that the Wikipedia page about her in English is one of the best summaries out there of about who she was and what she did. The Wikipedia page in French is so full of details that I found it terribly confusing. So that's just a little brief summary, and we'll talk some more about Joan of Arc, obviously. So tell us about who was in your group and when you took this trip.
Sure. We went in September 2019 for 2 weeks, and it was my husband and I and our childhood friend, Mike Clark. We've traveled together several times, and we always enjoy our company and exploring places we've never been. So we started planning about 10 months ahead of our trip. Your website and all your podcasts were incredibly helpful, as well as Oliver G's The Eiffel Tower, because we did spend the first week in Paris. But the second week, we rented a car and then drove to various places in the countryside. And I had studied French in high school and college, and I'm very grateful that my instructors didn't teach just language. They also taught culture and history, because as I started planning this, all those lessons came back to me, and names were familiar and why they were significant. And I hadn't really continued those studies all these years.
Right.
My first time to France was as a senior in high school, and that was 40 years ago. So that was a long time ago, and I don't recall a whole lot about it. But this trip was much more meaningful, because about 10 years ago, I started getting very interested in Joan of Arc again, and I've done a lot of reading. But like you said, her story is complex, and there's a lot known about it, and even I struggle to keep all those details straight, because her life was so brief, but so much went on.
Yeah.
But going to these small villages where she was born, and then several in between until we got to the town where she died, there's just some wonderful things to explore, and it's history of the 100 Years' War, but also World War I and World War II took place in these areas.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how, for most people, when you study history as a kid, you find it really, really boring. I mean, I love history now, but as a kid, I hated it. And then as you get older, you start putting stuff into perspective, It's a whole different, you think, oh, yeah, things keep happening over and over again. I mean, it's different events, but history does repeat itself, and we can find inspiration in what happened, even in stories as old as Joan of Arc's.
Right. Yes.
All right, so tell us about the first town on your list is Château Thierry, and episode 256 was about that, specifically about the history of World War I.
Yes, that was our first day in the rental car, and we picked it up at the Charles de Gaulle airport and then drove, and our destination was Reims. But we knew before we got there, our stops were going to be the Aisne-Marne Memorial Cemetery for World War I Americans, and the Château Thierry Monument. And both of those were very inspiring places. And at Château Thierry, we're overlooking the village, and we really hadn't intended to go into the village. And I'm really glad we did, because even, like we were talking about, Joan's story is so complex. I didn't realize that was a place she had been until we got to the fortress at the top of the hill. Mm-hmm. And there's a big storyboard about when Joan was there. And she actually came after the prince was crowned at Reims. She and 6,000 to 7,000 troops came to Château Thierry, where they were awaiting the king to make his progress after his coronation. He was due to arrive there, and he took a long time to get there, so they were there a while. But she and her troops drove off the English who'd been occupying that fortress for a while. I think it was maybe several years or months. But they led a little battle and drove them off, and were welcomed then as guests. But my favorite story about Chateau Thierry was while Joan was there. Well, it started before this, but Joan, as you mentioned, is very pious, and she required the soldiers who followed her to go to Mass and go to confession. They weren't supposed to swear, and they were supposed to get rid of all the camp followers or prostitutes that were very common then. Mm-hmm. And Joan was adamant about those women not being around. And at this fortress, there's a story that she came across one of them, and she knew what was going on, and she got so angry she drove this woman off with her sword raised, and she actually hit her on the back, so the story goes, and it broke her blade.
That's quite the hit.
I know, and I think these are some of those stories that maybe they were a little bit sensationalized. Could be, but maybe. That seems pretty harsh.
Yeah, well,
but that just shows her. She was known for being pretty passionate and having quick to anger, and would just, if it was to protect her piety and following God's orders, she got pretty hot-headed.
Yeah, she was all into that. Yeah, a strong personality for sure. All right, so that's Chateau Thierry and what Joan of Arc did there. All right, and then you moved on to Reims, which is where your hotel was.
Right. We stayed at Hotel Campanile, Reims Centre. Did I say that right?
Campanile?
Campanile.
Was it?
Yep, right on Boulevard Paul Doumer.
Okay, I'll put a link in the show notes because you probably sent it to me in your notes.
Yep. It was a great location, and they had parking, so you could easily get in on and off the highway right nearby, and then it was easy walk to the downtown area, or you could drive.
That's good to know.
We found getting around Reims was very easy. Parking wasn't always easy, but you had to be patient.
Yeah.
So the main reason to stay there, of course, was the cathedral where the kings were crowned, and Joan escorted the prince to be crowned there, Charles VII, and it was really important to me to see that and spend some time there. And the cathedral has been rebuilt. It was damaged after, I think, World War II, but it is a beautiful example of Gothic architecture, and it's kind of dark inside. The stained glass windows are beautiful. There's a chapel dedicated to Joan of Arc that's just lovely. But again, it's dark, and one of the things, I took a few minutes to sit down and think about how this cathedral would have been so decked out in elegant tapestries and gowns for a coronation, and all the coronations they ever held there. It would have been completely different, and I spent a little time thinking about that, because you can't see any of that when you visit these cathedrals.
Right.
But they were, it would have been such a part of their story.
Yeah, you have to have a bit of an imagination or have read some books about it so you can imagine what it was like when you're in the place.
Well, one of the things about Joan of Arc is she, in terms of art, her story and these different scenes that we associate her, including the coronation of the king, have been painted and sculpted and prints made of it through the centuries. So there's so many images of what it would have looked like, and so I drew on some of that when I was sitting there. But
that's cool.
Right next to the cathedral is a restaurant that we had dinner at, Au Bureau, and you can sit near the windows or sit out on the patio, and you're looking right at the cathedral. And that was very nice. I don't remember what I ate, but I remember the view was great.
That's good.
And it was, and it was one of those days where we'd walked, and I realize often that I don't even remember what I ate because I'm so tired by then, but it was just great to sit down and have that view. Yeah,
that's something to be prepared for, because anybody who has a normal North American lifestyle doesn't walk that much. And when you come to visit in France, most of the time, the easiest way to get around is walking. And you might end up walking, 5 miles a day or something, which you don't normally do in your everyday life.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we track ours because that when we go on trips like this, we're always amazed how many miles are recorded. And I think we did something like an average of 8 miles a day.
There you go.
And nearly 100 miles over 2 weeks.
Yep.
But it doesn't, that sounds like an awful lot, but the beauty of walking is you see things, you smell things, you experience them up close and personal. And
totally.
As long as we can walk, that's what we're going to do.
Yep.
There was another restaurant in Reims that we really enjoyed called Le Café de Reims. And it wasn't busy when everybody else was, which we thought that was a bad sign. And it looked a little out of date, but we could be seated right away. And again, we were exhausted. So we ate, and we had one of the best meals there. We were totally surprised. We had several. I know we had sea bass and dorado fish for dinner, and some of the best desserts. There was a creme brulee made with the Fossier cookies. That is one of my favorite desserts ever.
That's a nice treat.
So we enjoyed the city over a couple days, but we were able to take road trips from there.
Yeah.
And to some of the more significant towns related to Joan.
Right. And also, when you're at Reims, you have to look for the statue of the smiling angel on the cathedral. There's one angel with the enigmatic smile. It's lovely.
It is. And when the sun is kind of a golden, some of my photographs of the cathedral, it's just spectacular. It became more of a yellow golden color in the late afternoon sun, and that angel just showed up brilliantly in the photograph I captured.
Great. I hope you sent it to me. I will look through your photos.
Okay. I'll make sure.
Yeah. All right. And so from there, you took some day trips. Did you go to Don Rémy La Pucelle from Reims?
Right. Yes. One day trip was Don Rémy La Pucelle and Vaucouleurs. Vaucouleurs is on the way, and then Don Rémy was the farthest point for that day. So we did. We piled into the car one morning and headed off to Vaucouleurs. And one of the things, no matter how well we planned, we always seem to arrive when all the shops are closed. It's like that afternoon time. By the time we packed up and got on our way and dilly-dallied, we would get to these towns. So in Vaucouleurs, before we got there, we realized we were going to miss the restaurants for lunch. So we stopped at a Carrefour or another one, a Monoprix maybe, and we had we just went through the store, and each of us would scoop up like picnic supplies, like ham and cheese and bread and something for dessert and something to drink. And I know that particular trip, it was a very small town, and the locals you could tell they weren't used to some Americans just wandering around and chatting, and so it was fun. But one experience we had was a good reminder that you have to watch how people what they're doing with their produce, because in some of the French stores you have to weigh it yourself and get a sticker so you can purchase it on your way out. And we forgot about that there, and so we went into the line, and it was a busy day, and the clerk was like, she couldn't sell me the bananas, and
because you hadn't weighed them.
English. Yes, and I thought it was an interesting experience because the couple behind me seemed to be scolding her. She probably could have done it, she just chose not to. And we were like, that was fine. One of those things, like, it's okay.
And
I can live without my bananas today.
It's kind of silly because every store does it a little bit differently. So some stores, you don't weigh your own things. They do it at the cash register. And some, you have a person who's there just to weigh everybody's things. And some stores, you're supposed to weigh them yourself, but in the produce department. So it's just like weird. Even French people get caught with that all the time, because if you go to a different grocery store, you don't know, if you don't pay attention, if you're being your normal self, you're going to get it wrong at some point. So
right. Well, that was just a really good experience for us, because then after that we always looked around to see how that process should work in whatever store we went in.
Yeah.
And we had the most delightful picnic out of the back of the Jeep we were renting that week. We parked out in the countryside on a sort of a farm road, and across the street from where we were eating were these beautiful white cows, and they were staring at us. And, we were giggling, and it was kind of chilly, but we didn't care. It was fun.
Yeah, you were into the cows' daily entertainment.
Yeah, it looked like it.
Yeah.
I have all these photos of those cows just staring at us. I don't know if they wanted some of our lunch or.
Oh
what.
No, cows are really curious.
Yeah,
they're very curious. Yeah.
Yep. So it was a beautiful, and that became one of our favorite ways to have even dinner. Sometimes we would just go to the store and scoop up a bunch of different things we'd never tried before and sit down and enjoy it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people do that. I do that when I'm around, out and about in France. If I want a sit down restaurant, I go. But if I just want to have few things. Of course, it's not as surprising to me since I live in France. I know the products, but I try the local stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we did that before, and then so we went into Vaucouleurs, which is a town right near where Joan was born in Domremy. But when she finally, so she heard voices, the St. Michael, St. Catherine, and there's another one that are frequently part of her story. They started encouraging her when she was very young to stay pious and pure. So then when she was 16, 17, they finally said it's time to go to Vaucouleurs, because she needed to persuade a noble to introduce her to the prince. And her main job, that her voices told her, was to get the king crowned.
Yeah.
So she couldn't just go to court and knock on the door and say, I want to talk to the crown prince. She needed to get someone to introduce her.
Yeah.
So that's why Vaucouleurs was so important. Robert de Baudricourt was the local noble, and so it's about a 20-minute drive, I think, from Domremy. But, so she had to sneak over to go visit Robert de Baudricourt, and it took her several months to convince him to take her to the crown prince in Chinon, which is not where we went. But so she was in Vaucouleurs for quite a while, and there is a little museum to her, and it is just full of different artwork, sculptures, paintings, posters, prints, even china, decorative arts. And there's a little gift shop. There's a church again there where she supposedly prayed frequently and spent a lot of time in. And then there's a newer church, which is now several hundred years old, that has a chapel dedicated to her. There's a lot in that town about her. And so there's a lot of things to see. But my favorite part was, so it was a fortress at the top of the hill, like many of these little towns, and what remains is a gate where Joan, finally, Robert de Baudricourt agrees to take her to Chinon, and they leave through this gate. It's called the Gate of France, and they set off from there in 1429. And that's still there, and it's a beautiful sort of, arched doorway that remains of this fortress wall. And it's above the town. And you can see the little church where she used to pray. And then right next to it is an old lime tree with this big sign that says, this is the only living thing remaining that would have been here to see Joan through the gate.
Oh, how nice.
When she left that day. So,
how nice. Yeah, because nice. When she set off from Vaucouleurs, it was a long, it's a long way to Chinon, to where she met the king. It's halfway across the country. So Chinon is in the Loire area. So she went from the eastern part of France to all the way almost to the west and a little south. So, and there's significant towns all along the way that we're not going to talk about. But yeah, there's plenty. It must have been a long trek.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And it was also through occupied territory.
Yeah.
So Vaucouleurs and Domremy were like this teeny little holdout from the Burgundians and the English. It was still French occupied. And it's all due to Robert de Baudricourt's leadership. But so when they made their way to Chinon, they had to go through all this occupied areas. So they probably traveled at night and slow and steady and hiding from the other troops. And in Vaucouleurs, we picked up, there's like a map, and there's I gave you the link to this website where you can follow like the trail of Joan of Arc, and every little town that is associated with her story has a marker, has sculpture, there's different things you can see. And that that was one of those wonderful things I found out while we were there is I came across this and we were able to use it.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. All right. So then you also saw Domremy la Pucelle. What is that like?
Yes. So Domremy is still very much a little village. Her home, Joan's home that she was born in, and her father's farm is still there, and it runs along, I think it's the Meuse River.
La Meuse.
Meuse River.
Oui.
So, the house is there, and they have added on, there's like a visitor center, and then there's a cultural experience that's about the Middle Ages, and it's a big complex. And so there's 3 different things you can do. You can walk the house and the garden. You can go in the visitor center, which is pretty small. But then the cultural center has, you have a choice of a shorter film or a longer film about Joan. There's some exhibits about the Middle Ages, and there's a display of what people wore in that village from that time period. And then there's a whole, like a puppeteer kind of show, an animatron. It's like Disney, in a way where you sit in a little room and they spotlight one of these animatrons, puppets, and it tells you a story and it lights up different ones as they go through that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So, we did, spend some time there. I believe there's another cathedral in Domremy that's newer, like several hundred years newer, that we didn't get to, but I think that's also probably an important site that someone could spend some time in if they wanted.
Cool.
But I really enjoyed it. The house where she grew up and the church that was right next door. There's a lovely story. Like, she was so devout, she would bribe the priest or whomever was responsible at the church to ring the bells on time, because back then they would ring them several times a day to remind the village to pray and come to mass. And so Joan was adamant that he rang them on time throughout the day like he was supposed to. So the story is she bribed him with little cakes that she and her mother would make so he would be inspired to ring them on time. So she could always pray like she wanted to.
Wow. Yeah,
But it's a village, and I just thought it was terrific. I just really enjoyed it because it's small. There weren't a lot of people there. In fact, when we were in her house, there was nobody else there but us. In the garden outside where she's been portrayed in artwork many times, hearing her voices, hearing the saints talking to her, and that garden is still preserved there.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm assuming that not a lot of North American visitors make it there.
Yeah, there was a big tour bus group in Vaucouleurs who were there when we were. But when we were in Domremy, we saw a few other people, but it was either the time of the year was great, the end of September, or it was just the right day of the week.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Mm-hmm. And, okay, so after Domremy, you went to, let me see if I can, was it Compiègne next?
So after we were in Reims several days, because one day we did the Champagne tour in Reims and some other...
Was that good?
Explored some other... we went to Pommery, and we enjoyed it, but I think it was in your episodes about the Champagne tours that we realized, like, you've seen one, you've seen it all, and we enjoyed that one, and we enjoyed the Champagne, but we weren't compelled to do more than one.
Sure.
Other people I know have really liked it, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, we're glad we did that.
Cool.
We liked the Champagne, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then, so from there, you left Reims to go stay where?
In Rouen.
Ah, Rouen,
So,
okay.
right. And on the way to Rouen, we stayed in Campanile. Or we stopped in Campanile. We didn't stay there.
Compiègne.
On the way.
Compiègne. Yeah, that's a hard one to say. Compiègne.
Yes, it is. I don't want to say it the way it's supposed to be. But, and that was a Sunday, and it was very overcast and gloomy, and both of these towns are part of the gloomy part of her story, so I thought it was very interesting.
Appropriate.
She was captured outside of Compiègne.
Yes,
and
you did it.
I did get it. There's a chateau there, but we didn't want to go through that. But we wanted to walk around, and the downtown area has many of those medieval timber frame buildings in that city center. But everything was closed, and it's like we had the streets to ourselves. When I look back at the photos, we're the only people around and everything's closed. It's just like it probably is today with the coronavirus.
Yeah. Which is why
a beautiful
rural France doesn't have a lot of coronavirus, because that's the way people live anyway. They stay home.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a Sunday and everything was closed.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But we enjoyed walking around it a little bit, and there's a city hall with a Joan of Arc sculpture embedded in the facade, and then there's a little park across from the city hall with a big equestrian sculpture of Joan, and her standard or a French flag is in her hand. Mm. And that was, I wanted to be sure to see that. It looks like there are holes in the building. It probably had been damaged in one of the wars, like many places around there. So we were there very briefly, and then we went on to Rouen. And we stayed at a wonderful hotel, the Best Western Hotel Gustave Flaubert. And that's right off the Val Marché, the main downtown area. Mm-hmm. We really enjoyed staying there. There were some interesting things that happened when we got to this point in our trip. One, President Jacques Chirac had died in the week before, and so we arrived in Rouen on Sunday evening, and on Monday everything was closed because it was his funeral on the National Day of Mourning.
Ah. And
then a few days before we got to Rouen, we didn't we didn't pay attention to this, but when we got out of the car, we smelled something terrible, and I thought the car was overheating. And then my husband looked at the dashboard. There were no lights on, so we parked the car and we went into the hotel. And by the time we got to that point, we'd noticed people were wearing face masks. Again, it's so weird. Like, that's so common today.
Right. Yeah, but last year, no.
And it was because of a huge chemical plant explosion outside of Rouen,
right,
that released all these dioxins in the air, and there was it was just a very strong burnt oil smell, that we had to deal with. So the hotel staff said a lot of people had left the city, and they either that or they were wearing masks because they were concerned about the chemicals. So
yeah, and there's still dispute to this day as to whether or not the air was dangerous to breathe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But while we were there, so we got there on Sunday, we had just enough time to go to an immersive experience called the Joan of Arc Historical. And it's in the building associated with her trial. And it's a sort of a light show / storytelling. And you move through the various floors of the building. So you get a headset and you go to the first room and they start talking about her retrial, but it tells her life story that way. And how unfair it all was. And but you make your way all the way to the top of the building, and the last part of the story is where she was burned at the stake. And that was very moving because they put you in this top room and the blinds all close, and then fire is projected on all the screens. And there's even a little bit of smoke pumped into the room, and they talk about her last words, and they have an actress portray her saying Jesus, Jesus, which is what her last words recorded were. And it's very moving. It's just, if you get into the Joan thing, then it's hard not to tear up.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's also informative, so it would be a good display to go see if you want to learn about her, because it's probably approachable to even people who don't know that much.
Right. And so my husband and Mike were they heard about me talk about Joan, but they don't know the story as well, and they both came out of that and said, "Wow, had no idea." So it is a good experience, and it's not really long. It's probably 45 minutes. So it's not like you have to be there a long time.
Right, not a big time commitment.
But it was a good experience. And off the Vaux Marché, there is the Église Saint-Jean d'Arc that is newer, that was built right next to the place where she was executed. And there's a massive cross in a garden next to that church that indicates the site where she was executed. And it's lit up at night. And it's very pretty and solemn. The church is lovely. And when we were there was a choir practicing, and it was even more of a special visit than just walking through. And in the summer months, we went just after all the summer light shows finished. But if I could go back and do something different, I would go a little bit earlier in September, because they project these incredible light shows on the front of the cathedral, and particularly in Rouen and Reims. And I'm assuming every summer maybe it's a slightly different version of the story. And then my last recommendation in Rouen is we ate dinner at De Même, right on the Vaux Marché, and we had again a great fish dorade for dinner and another great dessert.
I'm starting to see a pattern.
Yes, I like chocolate.
That's great.
That was another perk of going to France, all the great French desserts and all the chocolate.
Yeah, lots of chocolate stuff. Yeah, it's very interesting I mean, Joan of Arc is such a huge topic, but it's for sure that she is well loved and well admired. You will see her statue or some sort of Joan of Arc, something or other, in almost every church in France, even small churches. Typically, in a church in France, you will see two people predictably. Obviously, the Virgin Mary and Jesus, obviously. But the other two you see is Joan of Arc and Saint Anthony of Padua. These are the ones that you find in almost every church. As a matter of fact, whenever I go into a church, I look for them. Sometimes they're small, they're not always big and visible, but they're everywhere. So they are objects of reverence, let's put it that way, for French people. And of course, she's also become kind of a symbol of the more nationalistic, extreme right political parties in France. Mm-hmm. So you have to be a little bit, cognizant of that. That there's a lot of people using the symbolisms of Joan of Arc. It's kind of a rallying cry, meaning I'm extreme right wing and nationalist. So it's got good and bad, I guess.
Right. Well, and through the centuries, she's been adopted as an icon, of bravery and courage, like the women's suffragette movement. She became a symbolic figure at that time. And again, even World War I or II, she's featured on a lot of posters of nationalism.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I tried to find, I thought I would easily find like how many public art images there are of Joan of Arc in France, because you're right. Every town I think we went to, she's either in the church or she's in a public place.
Oh, yeah.
Because she's so significant to the story.
Yeah. In Toulouse, we have a beautiful statue of her. Place Jeanne d'Arc is what it's called. And they renovated her statue recently. It's beautiful now. Of course, in Paris, you have the marvelous statue on Rue de Rivoli, the golden Joan of Arc. I hope I tagged this photo. I found a photo in one church in France where it showed Joan of Arc on the pyre. And that's the only one I've ever seen where she's shown in death. Everywhere else, she's shown on a horse, triumphant, leading the people, kind of representation.
Right. Yeah. Or very devout. She's in prayer, or looking up to the heavens, kind of image. And the golden equestrian statue of Joan at Rue de Rivoli in front of Hotel Regina. I just learned this. I completely had missed this up until just a couple days ago. That is the site where she was wounded during the siege of Paris. Mm. And I didn't realize that around the corner from there is a marker on Rue Saint-Honoré. Mm-hmm. And there used to be Gate Saint-Honoré. And so there's a marker between like what Americans would call the first and second floor that it's a Joan of Arc image to signify this is where that siege took place, in which they lost, and she was wounded. And so there's a lot, even in Paris, about her story that it's a little hard to find, right. But it is there.
Yeah, people who, I was considering writing a tour for that part of Paris, and I would definitely include it in any tour I write, because it's interesting and it's surprising. You see things that you didn't expect to see right there, but there it is, So look up when you're going around Paris. Look up, read the signs, because there's surprises everywhere.
Right, and I really enjoyed throughout France those historical markers. They look like a shield.
Yeah,
they're kind of a brown and red. I don't know if they have a a name for those, but I would photograph them and then I would upload them into Google Translate and it would translate them for me.
Oh, cool. I didn't realize that Google Translate could do that.
Yeah, 'cause there was no way while I was standing on the street could I I can speak a bit of French and I can figure out most of what's the gist of something.
Yeah.
But, some of those are pretty lengthy bits of information,
Yeah.
and I really wanted to be able to take time and digest those. And
that's
I found
a good
that
tip.
was extremely helpful.
Yeah. I always read them, but of course I read French. But I didn't realize you could feed that photo into Google Translate and they'll do it. Very cool. Very cool.
Yep.
All right. So to finish off, do you have a favorite book about Joan of Arc that you can recommend?
Yes, if you want to read, the true story, with some research behind it. It's Joan of Arc, A Life Transfigured by Catherine Harrison. I really,
you enjoyed that one.
My copy is quite well worn. I find it very helpful. There's a chronological, timetable about her life in there, and she talks about a lot of the places that we went to, and so I took that with me, and I would read from it when we were in some of these places to remind us what took place in each of them, because as we've talked about, like, her story is complex. There's, some places she passed through twice, and
Yep. Thank you so very much. That was very interesting. I think we'll release this one around an anniversary for Joan of Arc. I can't remember what we had decided, but
right. May 16, 2020 is the 100th anniversary of her canonization by the Catholic Church.
There you go. Oh, and also I learned an interesting tidbit. So after Charles VII was crowned, that she got him crowned, he started entering into alliances, as they always did. And some of these alliances were with people who were formerly his enemies. And that made her really mad. And to try and placate her, he ennobled the whole family. So her name used to be Jeanne d'Arc, where it was D-A-R-C, just in one word. But he made her Jeanne d'Arc, D''A''C, so now she has a particle. The de particle in French is a sign of noble heritage. And it didn't work. She was not placated by that. And as a matter of fact, that's how she got captured in Compiègne, because the king that she had just helped be crowned had made alliances, and the English were surrounding Compiègne and put up a siege, and the people of Compiègne asked her to come save them. And she was able to rally up 400 men and go try and retake the city of Compiègne, but it failed, and she was captured, and that was the beginning of the end for her. So, yeah, lots of interesting stories around Joan of Arc. If you're interested, if this episode was of any interest to you, you should really read the book that Kim suggested, which I haven't read, so I'll read it too. And I think doing a trip like that around a theme is fantastic. I think it's one of the best things you can do, because it's slow travel, especially when it comes to Joan of Arc. You're going to be mostly going to rural places. You're going to be talking mostly with French people. It's not like Paris, where everybody has dealt with tourists for decades, and they know what to do. You're going to be in situations where you need to use your French, and where you'll be really with the French people, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, that's what we found, is they had more time to, and were more interested in helping you through your French. And they may know a little English, but I was often the only person at the purchase point or asking for assistance, and they were more than willing to converse with me, and so it was great to practice that and not feel like they were annoyed or in a hurry because they had time.
Yeah.
So, and we did find, just at the beginning we were talking about how history has more meaning as you get older. I can remember taking car rides when I was a little kid through the countryside. We live in a rural area and thinking it was so boring. And now, just like going out into the countryside of France, it's like the rolling hills and all the things you see going through these little villages is charming and beautiful, and then the people are warm and friendly, and those are the things that I think I appreciate more as I get older.
Yep. Agreed. Thank you so much, Kim. You've been wonderful, and I wish you continued health in this time of pandemic. Let's all try and wait it out.
That's right. Dreaming of our future trips to special places.
Exactly. Thank you, Kim.
Merci, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you, Cindy Hughes and Gail Withers, for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. Cindy wrote, "Merci beaucoup, Annie. Your podcast was my go-to for my sisters and my trip to Paris over the New Year's 2020 holiday. You guided us through the crazy train strike, led us to a spectacular Bateau Mouche dinner cruise on New Year's Day, and more. And now your podcast transports me to France for a bit every day, which brightens up my sheltering in place from Austin, Texas. I'm getting lots of ideas for my next trip, perhaps the end of 2021. Looking forward to joining you in France soon." Wow, thank you so much for the kind words and for giving back, Cindy. I know it sounds trite, but it's the truth. I couldn't do this podcast without Elise. I couldn't do this podcast without guests who volunteered to come on the show. And I couldn't do it without the financial support of my patrons and donors. Merci beaucoup. Visit patreon.com/join us. That's Patreon. Join us, no spaces or dashes, to see the different reward tiers. And thank you so much, all of you, for giving back. And while we shouldn't be traveling while this virus is going around, eventually you'll be able to visit France again. Maybe you'll use the time at home to plan for the trip of a lifetime, and I can help you with that. It'll cost you $50, but you'll get a full itinerary review. We'll go over all the details on the phone, and I'll send you your personalized travel plan with lots of details. It's like getting your own travel book. It's kind of fun to do. Email Annie@joinusinfrance.com to set that up and write itinerary review in the subject line. And if you'd like to support the show without spending a penny you wouldn't have otherwise, before you go shopping on Amazon, go to the bottom of any page on joinusinfrance.com and click on the Amazon ad. Because you came to Amazon through my site, I get a small commission, and it doesn't cost you a penny more. And thank you so much. For my personal update this week, I want to say how refreshing it has been to have people on the Join Us in France close group on Facebook actually be podcast listeners. All the help me get my trip ready with zero thinking on my part are gone. They're gone. Poof, gone. The folks who are there now post photos of previous trips. They ask the others to guess where they took the photo. They ask questions about something I said on the show. They share recipes and book recommendations. They wonder where else they might want to go in France. It's actually really nice. And so if you're not in the group, search for it. Join Us in France close group on Facebook. It's a good place for Francophiles to hang out. French Prime Minister and several ministers made announcements yesterday, that was on Thursday, May 7th, about how things will proceed in France after May 11th, as the country tries to open up again. I jotted down 17 major points. Number one, Paris and the northeast of France are still in the red and need to proceed with extreme caution. Number two, folks over 65 and or with chronic illness are admonished to proceed with extreme caution. Number three, everyone in France will be able to leave our houses without filling out a form, even in the red zones. What a relief. Number 4, we'll be able to go 100 kilometers for no reason, and even beyond for work and family reasons. To go over 100 kilometers, we will need a form, and if you're checked by the police, they'll ask for it and verify your home address with your car insurance certificate. The tone was definitely towards less law enforcement and towards more psychology, which is a good thing if you ask me. Number 5, public transport within cities will be massively ramped up in order to make it possible for people to take the metro and buses and still keep their distance. Number 6, in Paris, those with mission-critical jobs will be able to take the metro during rush hours, and they will check, and other people are told to stay away from the metro during rush hour. So again, there's enough room for people to keep their distance. And if you think about it, there are no tourists in Paris right now. If it's only a certain set of the population that gets to take the metro between 7 a.m. and 8:30 a.m., it's going to be much easier. Number 7, cities are turning car lanes into bike lanes in order to encourage city dwellers who fear public transportation to use a bike. Apparently, bike shops are getting loads of inquiries on the phone, and they'll probably sell out of electrical bikes within hours of reopening on Monday, I would bet. Number 8, everyone who can continue to work from home is encouraged to do so. Number 9, hand gel will be made available on public transportation. That's a huge change. Think back to your last visit in Paris. How many times did you use a bathroom at a restaurant or cafe that had no soap left? Yeah, that was almost normal. Now you'll find hand gel on the metro, and I hope you find soap in every bathroom you go to. Number 10, like I said, they are ramping up the availability of public transportation in cities. On the other hand, trains and regional buses will be kept at a minimal to encourage everyone to stay close to home. This is not the time to go taking the virus to an area of France that doesn't have much of it. Number 11, anyone entering France, no matter what their nationality is, may be asked to quarantine. They didn't give a lot of details so far because so few people enter France right now, but quarantine is a possibility. Number 12, masks are recommended but not mandatory in the public space. Number 13, masks are mandatory in public transport and taxis. Number 14, business owners can decide to mandate the use of masks on their premises. Personally, I will not patronize establishments where masks are not mandatory, and I have a feeling a lot of folks over 50 may do the same. Masks work when everyone wears them, because as many as 25% of the people who carry this virus feel zero symptoms. And since they are feeling fine, they go out and touch things and possibly occasionally sneeze on something. So it's simple. If masks aren't mandatory, I will not go in and I will not buy your stuff. Number 15. Cities and villages are distributing free cloth masks to everyone. I picked mine up today. I don't love it because you have to tie it in the back of the head instead of going around the ears, But I now have 3 masks for every person in my immediate family, and they've all been free. I know I can get more at the grocery store and at the pharmacy at a nominal cost as well. Number 16, the government will consider opening cafes and restaurants that have big terraces and can keep patrons far enough apart starting in early June. But it'll depend on how things go with virus circulation. Same with cultural events with fewer than 5,000. They're really trying, but we won't know for a while. Number 17, mayors will get a big say in opening parks, bike paths, riverbanks, canal banks, lakes and beaches, and other recreational areas. The rule is most of them will stay closed, but Americans argue in favor of opening them once they show that they have what it takes to make people comply to social distancing rules. I talked to a village official, I guess, today. He's the premier conseiller to my mayor, and he said, I asked if my walking path is going to be reopened. It's called Voie Verte. And he said they've been so busy with the reopening of the school, because that's a difficult problem, that they really haven't decided. But 90% of the path I take is technically in the next village over. And I learned that today. I didn't know. It's not like they put a sign or anything. So it'll depend on what that other mayor decides. So I'll wait and see. But we can walk in the forest, and we can, we have those where I live. They're full of mosquitoes, which that's why I don't go to the forest. But I may change my tune, because it'll be really nice to be able to go on a free walk with the dogs. We're going to beat this virus. It will leave scars, and it will change your country and mine, but it will pass. I feel the anguish of the American listeners who are hit the hardest at this time. Some places in America are hit harder than others, obviously, and I'm pretty sure the virus will continue to move around, but it'll pass even there. And my hope is that you don't leave your house if you can help it. Being able to stay safely at home is such a privilege at this time. I never understood that before, but I really do now. I was supposed to publish a new tour of Paris this month, but obviously that's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean I'm giving up on the voice map walking tours, because I think once it's safe to travel again, they are going to be a great way to see Paris without being in a big group. But I'm thinking of other things I can do that would be fun in the meantime, and I'm not quite ready to talk about it yet, but I'm planning, so keep tuned for that. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it if you'd share it with someone. Your friends will find Join Us in France on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Pandora, and via any podcast app they like to use. But you may have to show them how it's done if they haven't listened to podcasts before. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Have a great week of sheltering in place and maybe trip planning, and I'll talk to you next week. And as discussed on the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, Haut les Cœurs. The Join Us in France travel podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2020 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.